What's up guys, my name is Lex Veldhuis and welcome to another episode of Poker Coaching. This is the every hand revealed run of the 5:30 marathon. Let's jump straight in and see what Jordan has to say. This is a really nice tournament. Feels a bit too dirty to put, to act like I'm on final table here, you know? Hey Brent Senior. We want to bet this really big. Could even make a very strong case for overbetting. Good stuff. This is a 100% check. This fucking guy is crazy.
All right, and let's pick things back up. So we fold 6-5 off in the small blind, pretty standard. We open up king 9 suited, also standard, big blind calls. Nice c-bet size is reasonable on this board, small for the most part. So how do you think about this when you're thinking about sizing and like what's going on through your head?
So I generally feel that our turn strategy on a Broadway card has a nice bet big bucket versus the big blind. So I think in general we want to bet the king large if we're gonna bet. I think more so button versus big blind. Yeah, I just think that we have a gigantic. The king swings the equity in our favor. So on this board, I feel like we should bet big.
Yeah, I agree. The question is a little bit more maybe about like how big. So you bet 6K. I probably would have bet 10.
Cool.
Yeah. So So I'm basically just trying to get stacks in, right? It's basically it's more or less like a geometric size in a situation where I think geometric sizes are reasonably appropriate. I do think that when you have spades, it's a little bit tempting to try to keep some of the weaker parts of his range in because they're dead. So like for example, I feel a little bit more comfortable betting 10K with king queen, and a little bit less comfortable betting 10K with king nine of spades. If you know, I think king nine of spades is one of the hands where I'd want to go smaller. You could put like a hand like maybe pocket jacks in the same kind of bucket. You can put pocket kings definitely in that same kind of bucket. So if you want to use two sizes, I kind of like this. But if you're going to try to stick to one size, I'd prefer to see 10K. So
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. That's not the greatest river. And how do you think about this, like value betting versus checking or whatever? How are you thinking about it?
Yeah, I just don't think there's any merit to betting the jack. I mean, I think it's the lion's share of their range once they continue the turn. I mean, not saying they always have a jack when they call a turn, but I mean, it's going to be a significant portion. It's going to be pretty hard to get paid off by less, I think.
Yeah, I think that having the king of spades also really, like makes this much harder. Your kicker's not very good, so I think that you have to barrel like king queen, for example. I think for sure you have to barrel king queen when you don't have the king of spades. So if you happen to have king queen here, like or the king of hearts. So if you happen to have like king queen of clubs, for example, I think that's definitely a bet. I think if you have like king 10 with clubs, that's probably a bet. And for people that are watching, basically this player has king x of clubs, or sorry, king x of hearts and king x of spades. Those are the possibilities, right? This player might have check called the flop with like king 9 of hearts or something. This player would definitely check call the flop with like with the king of spades. So those are the ways that this player will have king x. And so if I have king queen, I dominate those ways that this player could have king x, which is and then if I have king queen, I would So it's more relevant. The one other issue is that this player could have a leading range on this card. This barrel is pretty big. I mean, like this still allows you to have like a little bit of jack x, like ace jack, for example, but it does subtract a lot of the jack x component of your range. So there should be a lead here, I think. Which when this player doesn't bet, if this player knows how this works, there's a little bit less jack x in the range, which makes things a little bit harder. So like whenever you get to the river and you're like, oh, like this river sucks, I'll just check. Like, well, that guy, this player's supposed to know that, and then as a result, is supposed to lead a lot. And then once a result of that, once they do check, things are a little bit harder. But I do think this was a good check though with the king of spades and a 9 kicker.
That's pretty wild.
Pretty wild. Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's a pretty wide flop call. All right.
Yeah, so this guy, and you know, this is not to call him out or something, because this is actually just mentions, I guess, a positive. I was so shocked. Like, I had him as a reg, and he was like 3xing. You remember, like last time he opened like 8 out of 8 small blind to big blind, 3xing the button, called this hand, and I'm just like So I looked him up like twice over the session, and he has just like a clear, straight up line to like from 0 to like 180k.
Okay.
Just crushes.
All right.
And I don't know. Maybe he has some like insane I don't barrel turns enough sort of stat on me or something. But like that king 9 off with no spade, that felt. I remember seeing that and just thinking like, what the fuck is going on? You know?
Yeah, that's a wide flop call. That's not going to be. My understanding is that that's not going to be good. So, lots of people can, when people win lots of money, sometimes they do a lot of things right, or sometimes they do one thing really, really, really right and makes a bunch of money, but that doesn't mean that they don't have leaks, right? So that king nine call was not very good in my opinion. So button opens, and we flat the big blind with ace jack off, and check flop, which is the only answer for you. And you check the turn, which I think is pretty legitimate. I don't think I'm going to be doing a lot of betting with this hand on this card. And how do you think about what to do on the river? What's going through your head now?
I think that if I generally especially on ace rivers, right? I generally really like overbetting these to like 2x spot because I think that's a significant part of his range that gets the river here. A reasonable amount has ace-x. I think that we have, obviously we have a shitload of stuff that's happening on his board, so I feel like we can get value, and we also want to pressure a range that's still relatively strong now on the river, right? Because, I mean, ace-deuce is a pretty good hand for him to have on the river.
Yeah, he's supposed to bet more ace-deuce and have less of it, but yeah, he's supposed to have like ace-10 and ace-9 and ace-8 more. But yeah, I think that overbetting's a very viable answer with, like, you use that answer a lot with the 7x component of your range. It's probably not as good with ace jack, although it's probably the bet that you would make if you want to bet ace jack, right? So the only reason I'm saying that is because like checking gets at least somewhat tempting, because of the blocking effect. Like you start to have blocking interactions with the ace, right? So like it's cleaner to do it with a 7. I mean, that seems pretty obvious, I think. So, but this is good. Like if that's what you want to do, like overbetting, that seems reasonable. Yeah, this is a bit big, but I mean, I think this is probably what you want to overbet to, because you want to keep it congruent with a 7. So I think this is a reasonable answer. I like this. How do you think about the small blind? Like how do you think about playing the small blind, and in particular, like how do you think about the bottom of the range?
You mean where the cutoff is?
Worst hands you'd play. Like what are the worst hands you'd play? What are the
I think I fold this one. I don't know. The funny thing is that I'll probably call 3 deuce off, you know. I would say that like I open fold hands like 7 deuce, 9 deuce, a3, but not a whole lot more than that.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Basically, you have like a lot of folding with the offsuit 2x block and a lot of folding with the offsuit 3x block. That, in my experience coaching, I'm not like generally speaking, I try to teach people fundamental, like more GTO or like theoretically based strategies, because it's just easier. It's easier to remember like how to do one thing first. But like this is just one of the scenarios where if the big blind's kind of passive, then you can pretty easily play 100% hands. So for the most, like if I'm in the big blind, or if Hello Toddy's in the big blind, or Size 25's in the big blind, or if Ape Style's in the big blind, yeah, you just fold like a lot of the offsuit 2s and 3s. I mean, it's really just that simple. You don't really fold many of the offsuit 4s. So against good players, you should fold the offsuit 2x and 3x block, and then against more passive, maybe more recreational players potentially, you just want to potentially consider limping 100. So do you fold any hands here against an 11 big blind re-steal, or do you just call off range, or how do you think about?
I mean, I'll probably fold like sort of like the suited 6x block, the weaker ones. I will say that I do think that if I think there's a lot of money for me to be made to do like a trainer in calling ranges like 10 to 15 big blinds. You know what I mean? Or like let's say 15 big blinds and lower, to just like, if I could do a trainer of like 1,000 hands and just this call or fold and see if I'm right or not, I think that would help me a lot. I feel like this is one of those things that I'm like, that I need sort of like volume practice in or something, because I'm very insecure about calling ranges in this exact spot.
Yeah, we could. That's something we could do. I mean, like, we could just spend some time, privately, you and I, just working through some of these types of scenarios. This I would just plug into a calculator. This seems relatively close. I'm fine with calling. I think when you have this stack size, like you end up having to defend a little bit more against this stack size because your opening range is like more linearly constructed. Basically, you have a lot of hands that really suck at calling, and this player is allowed to jam on you wider as a result of that. I think when you play with some of the tools that we use to study like HRC, you start to see that like this type of a opening, this distribution where you have like deep stack, deep stack, deep stack, deep stack. This is really favorable for this player, and you kind of see that in the like in the old school, in the old days where people would like really hate rat holders, people who would buy in really short and cash games. That's because it gives the player who's really short a really big edge, because all of these ranges are basically tailored to play against one another. Like, you know, this guy's going to play a deep stack range. This guy's going to play a deep stack range. And then this guy gets to take advantage of the fact that you guys all want to play 7-6 suited and that you're not opening like a more blocker oriented strategy and attack you as a result of it. It's a really advantageous situation for this player. So I think this is like kind of reasonable. I think it's really close. I'd have to look it up in a calculator too, though. I'm not 100%. Yeah, seems fine. You have lots of high card here to bluff with. I wouldn't bluff with that. All looks good.
Good.
Gonna be calling 4 bets with that one. So how are you thinking about this type of situation?
This actually, seeing this, like, I feel like the button should still actually. One of the things I talked to Parker about this, and Parker showed me like, you know, some charts for how wide you can still flat the small blind when you get short, right? I mean, to some extent the button, but I mean, generally I just think that the button is like capped pretty hard here, and I have a hand that dominates a lot of his flats, right? Like he doesn't have ace-8 suited, right? He doesn't have fucking ace-queen.
No.
He has like queen-9 suited or 9-8 suited or jack-9 suited, that sort of stuff. So I do really well against the buttons range. I think it generates a lot of fold equity for me as well to 3-bet against a stack that size. So I would have liked to see a squeeze here.
Okay, me too. That's basically why I was pausing. This hand can call, so it's not like it's a bad call. It's just it's a really attractive spot, I think, to squeeze. So I probably would have squeezed.
Yeah, I wasn't entirely sure because the cutoff is relatively uncapped. I feel like he's gonna check this board with a big portion of his range because the button's flatting range is all over this board, especially with these with this stack depth. So I think that the cutoff is still uncapped. So maybe a flat would be better here.
Yeah, I probably would have advocated. Like I would advocate for just calling. One of the things you can do in these situations is you can actually lead a lot of turns, which I think that a lot of people don't appreciate about multi-way pots, because like most people don't really appreciate how range interactions work. They just play. They give like too much priority to initiative, and initiative is like a proxy for how ranges work, because the guy that did the previous betting usually has a stronger range, and then as a result of that, he does the subsequent betting, right? So if the guy raised pre-flop, you should probably check to him, because if you called, your range was weaker than his on average, like your range is capped, and then you check to him because your range is capped and his range isn't, and then he bets. And so initiative as a proxy for how to play poker works in a lot of situations, but then there are some situations where it doesn't work at all, and this is kind of one of them. So in this situation, you call with an uncapped range, my opinion, right? I could be wrong about this, but in my opinion, in this situation, you call with an uncapped range, which means you have all the strong hands still, right? And you do that because of the reason you mentioned, which is that Hello Toddy still has a very uncapped range, still has lots of hands that are basically asymmetric that crush you. So Hello Toddy has queens, tens, queen 10. These are hands like, yeah, you do have queen 10, but you don't have queens or 10. So that's got, you know, like you happen to have sixes, but that's kind of an issue for you. You may not even have sixes just because of how short the button was. You kind of have to deal with the fact that Hello Toddy has all of that strength: queens, 10, sixes, aces, kings, ace, queen. You don't have really any of. You're missing the majority of that. So calling to deal with this is reasonable, but then you can just lead the turn a lot. So that's what my preferred answer would probably have been.
Yeah, I like it.
We're gonna call. How do you think about this?
I think these boards are hard. I always every time I don't have it, I feel like somebody's fucking with me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
I would like, if I call here, to yeah. I mean, like, I don't have that much ace queen or ace. I mean, I don't have any ace king. I don't have much ace queen at all either. So It's a little bit hard because I was gonna say like it would be nice to have 2 overcards to the 10 or something, but I mean at the same time, like queen high is where queen or jack high is probably where a reasonable amount of his bluffs come from. So in that sense, the 6 is kind of nice. He's also like it's not like he's betting like ace queen here twice. I mean he could.
I think it's pretty reasonable for him to double barrel some of those parts of the range. Actually, it's probably like on a 10, it's probably pretty reasonable for him to double barrel all of those parts of the range. Like you think about the best cards for this player, like you think about what you check call, right? You're going to be check calling, obviously, like you'll have some quads, but you have a lot of like ace highs and king highs. I think that counterintuitively, the ace and the king are probably not cards that are as good for this player, because those are the cards you're actually going to hit. I think that it's really difficult on you if the turn's a 10 or a jack, right? Because if you think about a 10 and a jack, it's hard for you to check call the flop with a 10 high hand, right? I mean, like it's not nearly as easy as for you to check call the flop with an ace high hand. So I think that your opponent's probably supposed to barrel the most on like they're opening the cutoffs. So they have offsuit nines. So a 9, a 10, and a jack are probably the turns that get c-bet the most. And then like a queen, king, ace, and in particular like an ace and a king are probably not going to be c-bet very often by this player. Again, I think that's kind of counterintuitive for a lot of people, because a lot of people would look at like an ace and be like, oh, this is a great card. It's like, not really, because that's how this guy is going to be calling a lot. Yeah, I think that this hand's a mix here. So I don't think you just fold this hand. I think this hand calls sometimes and folds sometimes, which is when you said it's hard, it's because that's why. This hand is like not a great hand to call with, but you just have a lot of ace highs and king highs, so you can't just fold them all the time, right? So like, gonna have to call sometimes. This is a decent one.
Yeah, I think what's really good about coaching is that you have to sort of face the music, right? You can't just secretly fold too much or something, because I already noticed like sometimes I've been playing against Alatoli a lot lately, and he's like I feel like he's so insanely tough in spots where he's just like, okay, well, I have an advantage, buddy, so strap in, and
Yeah.
I feel like he's really good at like these ICM scenarios. He's really good as a chip leader on the final table. He's really good on bubbles, and I notice on these kind of boards where I'm just like, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna call like ace high twice, and he's just gonna bet like 70% pot on the river, and let me just get out now. But it's such a toxic thought, right? Like I feel like I'm overfolding a lot against him. So yeah, it's good to it's just
He's
good
very
to
good. This player's very good.
yeah.
And yeah, so this is like, for this player, this is probably a bet range situation. If you ask me like handicap it, like what do I think this player's betting range is, I would just say 100%.
Yeah, I feel like he just has that sort of like, some players just have that sort of like sense of freedom where they just feel like, okay, I can just do whatever the fuck I want. You know what I mean? Like I am more comfortable than you, and that's actually, I feel like it's kind of funny. I mean, not to make this some sort of like fucking deep dive or something, but I just played an EPT, and I kind of felt like sometimes I feel like I'm losing that a little bit. Like I can definitely blast, right? Like you see it. I can blast in big pots. I can spew whatever, which I think is a good trait, right? It's harder to teach somebody to play aggressive, etc. But sometimes I look at somebody like Totti or Pone Diddy or something, and you play against them, and it's just such a fucking headache, It's so good to be a fucking headache to people in pots, because then you get people like me that pure fold ace-6 on the turn,
Yeah, I do agree with that, because people start, like you said, folding early just to not even have to deal with that problem. Like they just know it's going to be a problem later, and then they just concede early, and that's even better, right? So
yeah.
yeah.
Russ ES8 is the one that made me introduce the aggro reg label. Yeah, he's insanely aggro. Holy fuck. Like, I'm a bit blown away at how aggro he is, and in combination with what his graph looks like, To be honest. Yeah. Love to see a tank. There you go. How do you want it? How do you need it? A good card to check, I think. great spot with aces here. A lot of his floats gets there or pick up equity, right? So he's gonna call. Like when I say floats to pick up equity, like he's gonna call with some like king 10 with a backdoor flush draw or king queen, or he's gonna call his ace queens. I think I'm just gonna have to call the river. Check call. Awful run out, but I actually think that if he has a rando club hand, he's gonna shove a lot on the turn because he has so much fold equity, right? He's gonna shove the queen of clubs way more than like the 5 of clubs, just because the queen of clubs is such an advantageous card for them. But there's still dangers as well, of course. But, you know, we can't start folding aces here.
All right. This is good. That's nice. So how do you think about calling versus flatting?
Okay, so actually I want to ask you about something like that. I saw Pat tweet something about in a deep spot pre-flop. He said something, and I was just like, okay, the one we slow play is always aces, and then the ones that need protection we 4-bet, right? That you want to get in. So, but then he said on Twitter in a hand discussion, he said flat kings and queens to keep his range wide, and then shove aces to not lose out value versus like jacks and tens and whatever.
Right.
And that kind of flipped the way I thought about 4-bet pots.
Sure.
Around for me. So I wanted to ask you, because that's the way it kind of makes sense to me, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, you lose all your action. I mean, like, it's really hard to get 70 big blinds in post flop against queens with aces when there's a king on board. You know what I mean?
The answer is it depends. So it depends on how your opponent's range is shaped. And so the answer it depends kind of sucks. It'd be nice to just be like, oh, do this, do that. But the real answer is that it depends. And it depends on where the bluffs are coming from, and how you do against those bluffs, and whether or not you want to, you know, kind of push those bluffs out, or if there's any merit to pushing those bluffs out to some extent. And it also depends on how wide the value 3-bet range is, because it depends on like how much pocket jacks, you know, or pocket tens or pocket nines or whatever your opponent's likely to have. The wider their range is, for value, the more you'd actually probably want to 4-bet kings. Because then the protection component that you know becomes a little bit more relevant, and they have a lot of hands below kings, and pocket kings and pocket aces are pretty similar. You know, if they only have, you know, aces, kings, and maybe queens, you probably want to re-raise with aces, right? Because kings is going to get cut against aces and stack queens, and it's kind of like whatever. So you know, in ICM adjusted scenarios, and I know that 3-bet value range might sound really narrow, but in ICM adjusted scenarios, that's actually really common. And what you see in a lot of ICM adjusted scenarios is that you actually only 4-bet aces. So, or you there's a strong preference for 4-betting aces relative to the other pairs in ICM adjusted scenarios. And then, yeah, so the answer is again, it depends. So like in this scenario, I think you want to re-raise kings. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I see what you're saying. So it's like if I'm on the button and the cutoff 4-bets, then I actually want to jam my kings and flat my aces. But if I'm under the gun and I have aces and I get 3-bet by the big blind and the stacks make sense to slow play, you know, we can get the money in post flop. That's where I want to flat my aces, just because the big blind is such a narrow 3-betting range.
You want to re-raise your aces there? Because
re-raise. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so annoying
right.
when you try to explain something that's like technical, and then you make a mistake in explanation. I have that on stream as well. It tilts me so hard. But, okay.
But yeah, that's the right understanding. That's how I would think about it. So here, for example, I think this guy could have like nines or something. So like I would like to flat with aces and like 4-bet kings.
Yeah.
We can raise and call. Both options are good. You raise, I think that's okay. So how did you go through thinking about this?
I'm gonna check raise versus some of his ace highs, king highs, you know, his king sixes, etc. I'm gonna check raise some flops, but I feel like I just need to be aware of him being the 3-better, right? Like, I'm still absolutely madly in love with my hand, but the queen is really good for him. Like, a lot of his floats get there. Like, he's not gonna fold king queen to my check raise probably if small check raise, and he's not, you know, ace queen. I feel like the queen is in general a good card to check, and what better hand to do it with than aces?
Yeah. So the Broadway cards in general will be bad, I think. I think like the ace king queen will be bad for you.
Yeah.
and then the low cards, because you're a reasonable part of your check raising range will be Jack X, right? So yeah, if overcards will be bad for you and undercards will be good for you. I think that on a relative basis, the queen's the better one. So you'd rather see a queen than an ace, like with your range, obviously, not with your hand. You'd rather see a queen with your ace. You'd rather see, there's that misspeaking thing. You'd rather see a queen than an ace in terms of your betting frequency on this turn. So I think you have to bet sometimes, but I don't think checking's stupid, and I think you have to check a lot here. So it's close. I just kind of wanted to hear what you think about it and how you're working through it. Yeah, and you're just basically giving this player the chance to represent some ace-king asymmetry.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's if he's ever gonna want to bluff a run out, it's this one, right?
Yeah, the thing about this situation is that the ace really kind of sucks to bluff catch with, right? Like if he's valid for like as a bluff catcher in general, you don't you're hoping that you check and he jams ace king. That's how he's going to value bet, and you hope that you check and he bluffs ace deuce or ace five. I think, right? You check raise the flop, so those are probably slightly more likely. Or like ace seven with like a backdoor flush draw or something, if to the extent that he three bets that pre-flop. So that's kind of where you want his bluffs to come from, right? I don't like one of the ways that someone three bets pre-flop is with a lot of offsuit hot combos in position and a lot of like high card, low card stuff, but they can't call that with versus a check raise, right? So you can't really have king. He's not gonna have like king five offsuit very much, but that's not a bluff either. That's going to be probably a check on this river. I think that a lot of the bluffs come from offsuit ace x hands, or like ace deuce and ace five, and to a lesser extent potentially suited ace x hands. So that's my only issue. Like the rest of it seems fine, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of whatever. It's not really very material, neither here nor there. But yeah, it's just I wanted to see him bluff with something. I'm like, I want to see like where's that bluff going to come from? I assume it's coming from this. So
yeah, trust me, bro. If you look at my chat after you call a call with aces on this board, I'd rather have him bluffing as well to not have to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean that's I'm almost just speaking to whether or not it's tempting to bet compared to check, because as a bluff catcher this hand is so bad. That's kind of what I'm wrestling with. Is like, am I better off just betting, even though I understand all of the merits of checking? Am I better off just betting because I block where his bluffs are going to come from and I block where his value will come from? Like I block his ace king and I block his ace five. So should I just bet myself? Like that's kind of
yeah.
That's what
I see what you're saying, because it's also like, if he has let's say he has a queen some sort of way that he checked back on the turn. Let's say he has a hand like Jack 10 that he played this way, like we lose all of those.
Exactly. Yeah. And then so that's kind of what I'm struggling with.
Okay.
If there's ICM here, I'd definitely fold. If there's not, it's close. I think folding is still reasonable though, so I'm not going to pick on you too much for that one.
All right, that's it for this part. I really think we learned a lot from BBZ around bet sizing, short-handed play, blinds, and also what kind of suits we should use when. I hope it was informative for you guys. If you guys liked it, of course, check out BBZ. All of his links are going to be in the description. And if you have any questions, drop a comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you appreciate the content, and I'll see you guys next time.